When Justin bid $8.3 million for the painting, everyone was shocked. This painting was probably worth only around $6.4 million. Of course, it was normal if some rich people who liked collecting were willing to pay a higher price. So when Justin offered a price of $8.3 million, all the people were just slightly surprised. Now, to everyone's shock, Gerald added $800,000 this time. Gerald touched his nose under everyone's gaze. In the front row, when Justin heard the voice, his expression changed slightly. Then, Justin turned around. The moment Justin saw Gerald, the four people in front were stunned. Damn it! It's this bastard, Arnold cursed. How could Gerald have a cool of $92 million? Tyrone said with a sneer. Justin snorted coldly and just raised his head. Cassidy, how can someone like that get into this auction? Moreover, not everyone can bid here. Why don't you check the man's background beforehand? This person is called Gerald Kenneth. He used to be imprisoned for 9 years because of the crime of rape. He was removed from our Kenneth family. He is just out of prison and can't afford such a large sum of money. Gerald was quite famous in Sacramento. When others heard what Justin said, they looked over. Reese sneered and said, "Such a loser like you still dare to act tough. Let's see how you are gonna deal with it." On the stage, the host also frowned. He looked to the other side, where the organizer of the auction was. Then, a man in a suit stood up and walked toward Gerald. The man walked up to Gerald and asked, "Mr. Kenneth, are you sure you can take out so much money?" "No way." Without waiting for Gerald to speak, Reese, who was behind Gerald, sneered and said, "How can a person who just came out of prison like Gerald have so much money? It is even difficult for him to take out $830. He was raising the price on purpose. He probably thought that Justin would continue to raise the price. The man in the suit ignored Reese and just looked at Gerald. Gerald smiled slightly, thinking about whether to take out the diamond card. On cue, in the front row, a thick voice sounded faintly, "I can prove that this guy can." At this moment, everyone looked over. The person who spoke was a one-armed middle-aged man. He was also sitting in the front row. It was Leandro. Gerald looked at Leandro in surprise. Gerald never expected that Leandro would come. "Damn it, it's Mr. Hansen of the Universe Group." For a moment, many people were stunned. Leandro Hansen was a big heavyweight in Sacramento. The man in a suit in front of Gerald was stunned at first, and then he hurriedly said, "Since Mr. Hansen has said so, we naturally believe it." As the man spoke, he bowed to Gerald and said, "Sorry, sir. Ads by Pub Future." Gerald waved his hand and said, "It's fine." Behind Gerald, Reese was completely shocked. Reese never expected that Gerald would actually know Leandro, and Leandro would even testify for Gerald. Reese knew that this meant that Gerald could fork out so much money. Reese swallowed and found that Gerald had also turned around and was looking at him with a half smile. Just now, Reese was mocking that Gerald could not have such a large sum of money, and then Leandro came out to testify for Gerald, which was completely a slap to Reese's face. Reese couldn't help but feel embarrassed, and he cast his gaze to the distance with a guilty look. Up ahead, Arnold and the others couldn't help but slightly pause. Arnold looked at Justin and frowned. How could this bastard know Leandro? "I don't know. Mason works at Leandro's place." Leandro probably stood up for Gerald for the sake of Mason, Justin said with a frown. "Are you still going to raise the price?" Cohn asked. Justin shook his head and said, "If we continue, it will be a loss. Moreover, this brat is probably deliberately picking a fight with me. He may go bankrupt to take out $92 million. I will let Gerald take the bid and see how he humiliates himself." After a short commotion, Gerald successfully bid for the item at $92 million. Justin revealed a cold smile. Then, he looked at Arnold and said, By the way, since Gerald is here, you can call your men over. Now, we can take this chance to deal with him. That makes sense. Arnold grinned, then picked up his phone and walked out. The auction continued. After the first highlight, the next few things were not too precious. Later, Reese did not dare to say anything to Gerald after staying for a while. Reese made up an excuse and ran away. Reese felt a little embarrassed that the thing he failed to bid for was taken by Gerald. At first, Reese planned to get Gerald beaten up, but after Leandro stood up for Gerald, Reese did not dare to make a move. Leandro was not someone Reese could afford to mess with. Kiera and Gerald did not care about this, especially Kiera, who was eager to drive Reese out of there as soon as possible. Time slowly passed, and when it was time for the finale, another precious item appeared. This time, the item was not an antique, but a dazzling diamond pendant, named Desert Star. The perfectly crafted diamond was in the shape of a heart. The moment the light shone on it, it was simply gorgeous. This pendant made the women at the auction go crazy. In the end, this pendant was bought by Leandro with $24 million. At around 10 o'clock in the evening, the auction officially ended. Gerald was led backstage to pay the bill. After paying the bill, Gerald successfully got the painting. Then he smiled and handed the thing to Kiera and said, "It's for you." Kiera paused slightly. She looked at Gerald in surprise and asked, "It's for me?" Gerald nodded and said, "Yes, don't you like it? Did you buy the painting because I like it?" Kiera was surprised. Gerald shrugged his shoulders and said, "That's right. Why else would I take this? I don't like collecting at all." Kiera shook her head continuously and said, "No, this is too precious. I can't take it." Gerald smiled and said, "Last time I put you in danger, I have been thinking of a way to express my gratitude. What's more, I might need your help in the future. Just take it with ease." "That's right, Gerald has plenty of money, just take it." At this time, Leandro also came over with a smile. Then Leandro looked at Gerald and asked, "Is this your girlfriend?" Kiera was shocked at first, and then her pretty face blushed. As Leandro spoke, he patted Gerald on the shoulder and said, "Gerald, you have good taste." Gerald coughed slightly and said, "Don't talk nonsense, this is just my friend. Let me introduce you to each other. This is Kiera Bender, the manager of New Bank." Leandro said with a disappointed look, "Gerald, you are not young anymore. Although you have been divorced once, you should move on. In this world, there are still many good women. Hurry up and find another one. I think Ms. Bender is a good choice." Kiera revealed a slight smile. Her face was flushed and she chuckled with her mouth covered. Gerald cleared his throat and then asked, "By the way, I didn't expect you to be so romantic at such an old age." "Bullshit." Leandro threw a delicate box directly to Gerald and said, "I have been married for so many years. What's the use of this thing? You know, my wife is very thrifty. If she knows that I have spent $24 million buying this for her, she will probably beat me up. This is for you. You can use it to hook up with a lady in the future." Leandro curled his lips and said, "You have to hurry and find yourself a partner." Gerald scratched his head and did not say anything. Kiera, who was beside Gerald, was not too surprised. Kiera knew that Gerald had a diamond card and a very mysterious background, so she was not surprised by what kind of friends he had around him. With the box in his hand, Gerald coughed slightly and said, "Let's go first." Gerald, Kiera, and Leandro walked out together. When they arrived at the entrance, Gerald and Leandro's expressions changed slightly when they discovered that at the entrance of the hotel, few people immediately turned to look at them. Gerald looked at Leandro, then said to Kiera, "Kiera, you drive back first. Mr. Hansen and I will go to have a drink." Kiera nodded, pursed her lips, and then said, "Thank you for your gift. I will keep it well." Gerald smiled and said nothing. When Kira drove away, Leandro twisted his neck and said, "Looks like you have offended quite a few people in Sacramento." Gerald smiled and said calmly, "All right, it's time to bare my teeth to these people in Sacramento. Otherwise, it would be annoying for everyone to cause trouble for me. You can leave first." "All right." Leandro smiled. Leandro was not worried about Gerald's safety at all. Leandro knew Gerald was the strongest in the night watch and was a man who had climbed out of the mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Leandro knew very well how powerful Gerald was. None of these gangsters could pose a threat to Gerald. After Leandro left, Gerald walked to the road far away from the hotel and pretended to wait for the car there. About a minute later, 4 or 5 people walked to Gerald's side and surrounded him from both sides. At the same time, Gerald felt a sharp knife on his back, and a voice sounded, "Don't scream. And don't talk, come with us now." Gerald came up with an idea, but he quickly said, "Bro, be cool. I will cooperate with you." Whoosh! At this time, a van stopped in front of them. The voice rang in Gerald's ear again. "Get into the van." Gerald obediently got into the car, and a few people followed in. The knife was pressed against Gerald's back, and one of them sneered, "Well done, man. You have provoked all the richest guys in Sacramento. You risking your neck." Gerald smiled at them and said, "Who asked you to come?" "Cut the crap. You'll know when we get there," the person who spoke coldly snorted. The car continued to move forward. About 20 minutes later, the car stopped at the entrance of a club. Gerald was pushed out of the car, and someone scolded, "Go in." Gerald touched his nose and then walked towards the tennis club. Seeing Gerald, one person smiled and said, "TSK, TSK. He's quite bold. He's not flustered at all now. After all, he was in jail for 9 years. Beside him, a person giggled and said, "He must be so experienced. This is a small matter for him." Ha ha ha. A group of people laughed. Gerald was also pushed into a tennis court with lights on. At this time, on a long chair next to the tennis court, Justin and Tyrone were sitting there. Not far away, Cone and Arnold were playing tennis. In addition, there were more than a dozen people who were holding baseball bats and steel pipes. Seeing Gerald arrive, Arnold and Cone put away the racket. Gerald was pushed to the ground, and then a large group of people surrounded him. Arnold wiped his sweat and stood up beside him. Cone and Tyrone also stood up. They walked to Gerald and looked at Gerald with a half smile. Tyrone looked up and down at Gerald and said with a half smile, "Hey, you're so calm. You must have learned a lot after being in prison for 9 years. As he spoke, he sighed and said, "I've already told you that I'd make you remember my name well. Now you can remember me. Right?" Gerald glanced at him and then swept his gaze over Justin and the others. He rubbed his nose and said, "You ads by pub future." Just as he opened his mouth, Arnold took a step forward and interrupted Gerald, "How dare you stand and talk to us? Kneel down first, and we will show you." Gerald frowned. Tyrone stepped forward and said, "Arnold asked you to kneel down. Don't you understand?" Gerald looked at him and said lightly, "You're such a good dog." "What the hell did you say?" Tyrone's face suddenly turned cold. Gerald rubbed his nose, his gaze slowly sweeping over Justin, Arnold, and Cone. He said, "So, you called me here today to beat me up, hit you." Arnold walked to Gerald's side and stood in front of him. "You are wrong. We are not just hitting you. We are planning to humiliate you." Beside him, Justin also said indifferently, "I want you to be good after you came back to Sacramento. But you actually dared to provoke me again and again. My hand was injured because of you. You can't afford it, low life." Cone did not say anything. He took a step forward and smiled at Gerald. Suddenly, he raised the racket in his hand and smashed it at Gerald's leg. He said, "Kneel down first, and then talk to us." A cold light suddenly flashed in Gerald's eyes. Then, He suddenly raised his hand and held Cohn's head, fiercely pressing it down on the ground. Cohn only felt a strong force. He could not resist at all. In addition, he swung his arm hard. At that moment, he lost his balance. He actually hit Arnold, who was beside him. Bam! Bang! Two sounds rang out. Arnold's leg was hit, and he grimaced in pain. As for Cohn, his head was pressed down and fiercely smashed into the ground by Gerald. Cohn was hit so hard, and he let out waves of miserable screams. Gerald's control over power was accurate. His attack would not cause fatal damage to Cohn, nor would it make him faint. However, the pain would make him suffer a lot. Ah! Cohn's scream shocked everyone. Some people did not expect that Gerald would actually dare to attack when facing so many people. Moreover, in an instant, Cohn was pressed to the ground. How dare you? Arnold ignored the pain and turned around to glare at Gerald. The people surrounding Gerald also came over at the same time. Someone pointed a steel pipe at Gerald and cursed. Beside them, Justin and Tyrone were shocked. When they saw Cohn get hit, they all believed that it must be very painful. They wondered how Cohn would feel now. Gerald, who was squatting on the ground, stood up with a smile. Then, his foot stepped on Cohn's face, and he looked at Arnold with a half smile. Take your foot off me. Arnold glared and shouted, Cohn is from the Dobbin family. You actually dared to attack him. You're courting death. Let go 1 inch. Tyrone picked up a baseball bat from a person nearby and rushed over, smashing it toward Gerald. Bam! At this time, Gerald grabbed the baseball bat. Tyrone was stunned. At this moment, Gerald's wrist suddenly exerted force. In the next instant, the handle of the baseball bat directly shattered and turned into a pile of sawdust. Tyrone was scared. He subconsciously released the baseball bat and retreated several steps back, looking at Gerald in horror. None of the surrounding people dared to take another step forward. Justin and Arnold opened their mouths wide and looked at Gerald in disbelief. How much strength did he have to be able to crush this baseball bat? You. Arnold opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he felt as if his throat was stuck, and he couldn't say a word. It shocked him too much. Gerald blew at the sawdust in his hand, clapped his hands, and said, Hey, this baseball bat is so lousy. It was crushed with just a pinch. Then, under everyone's shocked gazes, Gerald walked in front of Justin and Arnold with a smile and raised his hand. Bam, bam, bam. 3 consecutive slaps landed on their faces. It made Arnold and Justin come back to their senses. He was furious. Gerald, an abandoned son of the Kenneth family who had been in prison for 9 years, actually slapped them. Justin said with a gloomy face, Gerald, you actually dared to attack me. Gerald chuckled and said indifferently, people like you are nothing if your fathers aren't rich. Just spend your money, and enjoy yourselves. Don't provoke me. I won't cause trouble, but if you take the initiative to provoke me, don't blame me for being cruel. This slap can be considered a lesson. He shrugged and said, in any case, I am not afraid of you because I have nothing. If you still want to mess up with me, come at me. I am sure that you will suffer a lot more than Cohn. There were more than a dozen people holding baseball bats and steel pipes, but no one dared to move. Gerald's fight just now really frightened them. Suddenly, Arnold's eyes moved, and he looked at Gerald's left hand. On Gerald's left hand, there was a box with Desert Star from Leandro. This was the box of the Desert Star in the auction just now. They had all clearly seen it. And the Desert Star was bought by Leandro for $24 million. Who was Leandro? He was the president of the Universe Group. In Sacramento, no one was willing to provoke him. The Universe Group was quite large, one of the top companies at home. Even the Kenneth family, a rich and powerful family, would show some respect. Moreover, the Universe Group had been actively competing with the Kenneth family in some industries. Most of the time, the Universe Group could beat the Kenneth family. It was quite terrifying in terms of capital and background. In Sacramento, no one was willing to provoke Leandro. Therefore, when Arnold saw the Desert Star bought by Leandro in the auction in Gerald's hands, his pupils shrank slightly. How could the Desert Star be in your hands? Arnold let out a breath and asked. This. Gerald touched his nose and said, Mr. Hanson asked me to bring it back for him. What's wrong? Justin's expression also changed slightly. They had no choice but to consider the relationship between Gerald and Leandro. From the beginning of the auction when Leandro spoke up for Gerald, to now when Leandro asked Gerald to keep the Desert Star, it proved that Gerald and Leandro were close. Gerald looked at Justin indifferently, looked at Arnold, then turned to look at Cone on the ground. And said indifferently, remember, don't provoke me again. After that, he walked out of the tennis club. None of the dozen or so people dared to speak at this time. First, Arnold and the others in charge did not make orders. Second, Gerald crushed the baseball bat with his bare hands just now, which really scared them. Seeing Gerald swaggering out, the others hurriedly helped Cone up. At this time, Cone's blood was all over the ground. Send Cone to the hospital, Arnold hurriedly said. After that, his face was extremely gloomy. His face was slapped by Gerald. It was swollen with a handprint, and Justin and Tyrone beside him were in a similar situation. Why is Gerald so close to Leandro? My father is very afraid of Leandro. I'm afraid this matter will not be easy to handle. Arnold exhaled, then looked at Justin, and asked, what are you going to do? Justin's face was also gloomy. It was the second time that he had been taught a lesson by Gerald. Ads by Pub Future. He found that he was a little confused by Gerald. Gerald had just been released from prison. He knew Jessica and now had a close relationship with Leandro. His slap was the greatest humiliation he had suffered since he was born. He could not bear it. But at the same time, he did not have much confidence in dealing with Gerald. He gritted his teeth and sighed, wait and see. Let's see what Cone will do. Arnold's expression changed slightly. That made sense. Cone was beaten up by Gerald. The Dobbin family would not let him off. They were afraid of the Universe Group because they were afraid that they would cause conflicts between the Universe Group and their own family. It may cause their family to suffer losses. They could not bear the anger of their family. However, the Dobbin family was different. Darian had the diamond card of New Bank and could mobilize over $16 billion in New Bank. He also had a lot of authority. Cone had suffered such humiliation. Darian definitely wouldn't just let it go. Gerald didn't care what they thought at all. When he walked outside, he didn't go home immediately. Instead, he took a taxi to a place by the river. He and Caroline had agreed that they would send Eric to the night watch at night. When they arrived at the place agreed before, Eric was sitting there with 2 boxes. After seeing Gerald, he smiled excitedly and said, you will personally send me there? No, someone will come to pick you up later. Gerald touched his nose and said. The one who came to pick him up was naturally Dennis. Joining night watch was actually quite troublesome. He needed to follow Dennis to the temporary base of night watch, then entered the new barracks, and finally got the qualification. Around 11 o'clock, an SUV stopped in front of them. Then, 2 people jumped out of the car. Apart from Dennis, Hamza, who had a crew cut, also jumped over. After he saw Gerald, he trotted all the way over, and then fiercely picked up Gerald, and said, bro. Gerald also gave him a hug. They were recruited at the same time and joined the same team. Their relationship was quite good. However, Hamza could not keep up with Gerald and Caroline. He had to stay on the team. Gerald and Caroline became the top soldiers of the night watch. Hamza let go of Gerald and laughed. Gerald, good for you. Your ex-wife is quite beautiful. But she is just a little snobbish. Gerald looked a little embarrassed. He knew that he would probably be ridiculed by many watchmen. Dennis looked at Eric and said faintly, "Is this the guy you want to introduce to the night watch?" Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Eric raised his eyebrows and said, "My name is Eric Houston. You can also call me Five of Hearts." Five of Hearts. Hamza raised his eyebrows and said, "Fifth place on the Underground Killer list." The Underground Killer list that Gerald knew was released 3 years ago. He was familiar with other nicknames on the list, but it was the first time he had heard Eric's nickname. Eric flicked his hair and said, "Exactly. The pretentious guy on the Underground Killer list." Dennis smiled at Eric and said, "Every time you kill someone, you put a few poker cards on the corpse." Gerald looked at Eric in surprise. Eric coughed and said, "Sometimes, you gotta make it serious." "Alright, get in the car." Dennis said, "Let us go to the night watch base." Eric looked at Gerald. Gerald smiled at him and said, "Go. Don't let your master down." Saint 23 and not M. Have a gel friend. After sending Eric off, Gerald let out a long breath and took a taxi to his home. At the same time, in Sacramento, at the airport, a middle-aged man in a trench coat walked out of the plane. He was wearing sunglasses and a mask, and he looked very tall. Beside him were two extremely beautiful women with cold faces. He was domineering, and the two women were like his secretaries. He was walking fast, attracting the attention of many people. Damn, is it a celebrity? I don't know. It should be some big shot. His appearance caused many people to look at him. The middle-aged man ignored the crowd and went straight through the crowd. Soon, he walked out. Stephen was standing there with a smile. When Stephen saw the man, he gestured to lead the way. Soon, under Stephen's guidance, they got into a black car. The car slowly started. Stephen sat in the passenger seat and then handed a photo behind him. "He is the target?" the middle-aged man asked, his voice magnetic. "Yes," Stephen said calmly. "I am very expensive," the middle-aged man said calmly. "In addition, you have to introduce me to Jessica." Stephen said with a smile, "Of course. A divorced young woman like Jessica will not be able to refuse a man like you. You will get her." Gerald returned home. When Mason saw Gerald return, he let out a slight sigh of relief and asked, "What did you and Bree do?" "Let me remind you again. Bree is a married woman." Gerald was speechless. He hurriedly said, "Dad, what are you thinking about?" Bree also felt that what happened 9 years ago was a little strange, so she chatted with me. If I need her help in the search for the truth, she is willing to help me. "Really?" Mason asked suspiciously. "Why would I lie to you?" Gerald said speechlessly. Mason and Yasmin breathed a sigh of relief. Yasmin said again, "By the way, tomorrow you need to go on a blind date." Gerald was stunned and said, "Didn't the one that Uncle introduced last time refuse to see me? It was your aunt who set up another date for you." Yasmin said, "You helped Jolie find a good job. This is how they show their gratitude. Your aunt said that she will always set up dates for you until you find a girlfriend." Gerald was stunned. He quickly said, "Mom, I have a girlfriend." "Mom, I have a girlfriend," Gerald said. Yasmin intended to find a girlfriend for Gerald and he had one, which shocked him. Yasmin said, "I won't believe you unless you bring her back. You should go meet that girl tomorrow. What if you like her?" Gerald fell silent and could only agree. Returning to the room, Gerald pondered and said, "Damn it, I've pretended to be the boyfriend of Kiera and Audrey several times. I must let one of them pretend to be my girlfriend this time. Matter what, I have to make my parents believe me." He lay on the bed. Not long after, his phone rang, and he picked it up, finding that it was a video call from Red Rose. Gerald frowned and answered the call. A perfect figure immediately came into sight. Red Rose was scantily clad. Her perfect figure made Gerald hot all over. Red Rose asked with a smile, "Am I beautiful? If you think I look beautiful, you can come to me and See how it feels to stay with me. Gerald quickly collected himself and said, just tell me what you want to say. Red Rose snorted and said, well, you're not romantic at all, but I like this kind of man. Gerald was speechless, thinking that she must be a psychopath. All right, I'll get to the point. Red Rose smiled and said, Alonzo is in Sacramento. Alonzo. Gerald thought about the name, and a piece of information quickly came to his mind. Alonzo, known by most people as Windwalker, was ranked 4th on the killer list. He was a high-profile person and always wore a black windbreaker when he had a trip or carried out a killer mission. 2 beauties, who were twins, would always follow him. The 2 beauties were also quite skilled. They were both golden card assassins of Blood Lotus. He enjoys a higher status than me, so my supreme command of Sacramento will probably be deprived. Red Rose said with a smile. What is their purpose? Gerald asked. Red Rose said, they have 2 purposes. One is to assassinate a person in Sacramento for their employer, and the other is to control Goldson Group. Gerald's expression changed slightly as he heard this. He thought, Goldson Group. Does Jessica become the target of Blood Lotus? By the way, Alonzo is very charming. His goal is most likely to take action personally and get Jessica. This kind of divorced woman is lonely and may not be able to resist his temptation. Red Rose said with interest, actually I can't do that either. Sometimes. It's a pity that I rarely meet him. Smiling face. Casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Gerald cleared his throat and continued, alright, I got it. Keep an eye on his schedule and address. For me, I will take action by then. Well, why are you so unwilling to meet me? While speaking, Red Rose licked her red lips and asked, since you don't want to meet me in reality, why don't we do something on a video call? It's also very exciting. As she spoke, she even made an extremely sexy posture. Gerald was immediately turned on and quickly hung up the video call. Then he ran to the bathroom and took a cold shower. Before he completely calmed down. The night had passed. The next day, Gerald went to the company with Mason as usual. When he arrived at the entrance of Universe Group, he found an excuse to leave and ran to Kiera's house to sleep. At noon, he was awakened by Audrey. Gerald woke up and looked around, asking, where is Hazel? I don't know, she has been very strange recently. She went out every day when she woke up and only came back at night. I don't know where she went, Audrey shrugged and said. Gerald thought for a moment and knew what Hazel was probably doing. He had previously mentioned to Valerie that he would have Hazel and Jacob join Night Watch, so he thought someone from the organization might come to Hazel for a test during this period of time. After figuring it out, Gerald looked up at Audrey and remembered that he needed a girl to pretend to be his girlfriend, so he sized up Audrey. Dad and Mom should like a girl like her, shouldn't they? Gerald thought and said to himself. Audrey noticed his gaze. She glared at him and asked, what are you doing? Gerald cleared his throat and said, Audrey, since I met you, I've pretended to be your boyfriend and often invited you to dinner. Last time, I even spent so much money to stop Brian from pestering you. What are you going to do? Audrey looked warily at Gerald and said, don't tell me you want me to sleep with you in return. As she spoke, she pulled her clothes tighter to her body. Gerald was at a loss for words. What are you thinking? I'm not that kind of person, Gerald hurriedly said. I don't believe you. When you saw Hazel's good figure that day, you almost drooled, Audrey said. With a glare, Gerald didn't know what to say and sighed. All right, I'll tell you the truth. After I came back, my parents have been trying to find me a girlfriend, and I have to go on a blind date tonight. If they don't believe that I have a girlfriend, they will keep setting me up. On a blind date. Audrey was suddenly amused. She looked at Gerald and said, isn't it good to go on a blind date? What if you meet a beauty? That's impossible. If she is a beauty, she'll have many suitors with no need to have a blind date, so. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. I am wondering if you can pretend to be my girlfriend and go visit my parents. Audrey was slightly surprised at first and then revealed a smile, saying, I can do that, but you should treat me to lunch. If I'm satisfied, I might go with you. Gerald said, of course, I'll treat you. You can choose any restaurant in Sacramento. Since you said this, let's go to Splendor Restaurant. The food there is very delicious, and it is said that the chef and Mr. Durden studied under the same teacher. Audrey said. Carving was the chef whose arm was cured by Valerie in Los Angeles. Gerald was surprised to find out about the relationship between the chef of Splendor Restaurant and Carving. He nodded and said, no problem. With the black gold membership card of the restaurant, he could eat and drink anything for free. After that, the two of them went straight out of the door and took a taxi to Splendor Restaurant. After lunch, they went to an internet cafe to play games in the afternoon and left together around 5 o'clock. Gerald said, you can go have fun with Doreen. I'm going to meet my blind date. Audrey said with a smile, how about I go with you? I'd like to see what a blind date is like. Gerald hurried to reply, you'd better not go. If you take a picture, I don't know what I could do by then. He found a taxi for Audrey and watched her leave before taking another one to the destination. Soon, he arrived at the entrance of a coffee shop called Summer Days. Just as he got out of the car, Yasmin called him, hello. Gerald, are you there yet? Yes, I'm at the door, Gerald said. Don't forget that it's table 7. That girl is wearing a white dress. Yasmin warned, behave yourself. I saw her picture. She is pretty and also has a good job. She is working in Goldson Group, and your aunt said that she has a nice personality. Mom, I see, Gerald said. With that, he hung up, looked at the coffee shop, and walked in helplessly. Soon, he entered the coffee shop. After asking the waiter, he saw a girl wearing a white dress sitting by the window not far away. Her long hair fell on her shoulders, and Gerald couldn't see her face clearly, but he thought she should be good looking when seen from behind. Gerald touched his nose, walked to the front, and asked softly, excuse me, are you Ms. Silver? Gerald saw this girl's face at the same time. She was average looking and couldn't compare with Audrey and Kiera at all, both of whom were overwhelmingly beautiful. Wendy Silver looked up at Gerald and frowned when seeing his clothes. She then said in a flat tone, I arrived 13 minutes earlier than you. Gerald was surprised to hear that and said apologetically, well, the appointed time is 6 o'clock, and it is only 10 to 6 now. I think there is enough time. But it is impolite to have a girl wait for you. Wendy looked at Gerald, frowned, and said, take a seat first. She seemed to be familiar with a blind date and did not feel embarrassed at all. After Gerald sat down, Wendy looked at him and commented, your dressing style is a bit out of fashion. If you want to be with me, you have to change it. Gerald was speechless with no reply. Wendy frowned and added, I heard from your mother that you have been in prison for something and were just released. What is the reason for your imprisonment, and what is your job now? Hearing her question, Gerald was a little embarrassed. In fact, Gerald came here just to finish a task and tell the girl about the situation. He was not here for a blind date. Gerald did not expect that Wendy would ask so many questions at once. However, since Wendy asked about them, Gerald planned to leverage the chance to make Wendy look down on him and then settle this matter. He coughed and said, well, I indeed went to jail. As for work, I'm unemployed now. Unemployed. Wendy frowned slightly, then she looked at Gerald and said, your father is the vice president of Universe Group. Gerald nodded and said, yes, but he doesn't have much power over there. He just lives on his paycheck. As expected, after he finished speaking, Wendy frowned slightly and her eyes began to flash with disgust. Did your parents buy you a house in Sacramento? What are your plans for work in the future? Wendy looked up at Gerald and asked, I've lived a very fancy life. If we become a couple, I will not live with your parents. No, I live with my parents now. I have not considered my career yet. I should not be short of money. Gerald replied honestly. Then, Wendy laughed. She chuckled and looked at Gerald. I've been on many blind dates, and I've met all kinds of weirdos. How could they introduce me to people like you? You were in prison for 9 years. You are unemployed. Your father has a good job, but he doesn't have any power. An arrogant look flashed across Wendy's eyes as she said, Do you know what I do? I heard that you work in Goldson Group 1. Know your CEO, Jessica, Gerald said. All right. Now I know that you like to brag, Wendy said lightly. How come you know my boss? You dress so shabbily and don't look like a gentleman. In addition, you have been in prison. What's wrong with Lilia? It is such a waste of my time to introduce someone like you to me. I thought your dad was the vice president of Universe Group, so even if you were in prison, you could still get a job in Universe Group. In the end, your dad has no power at all, Wendy sneered. What a waste of time. Hearing this, Gerald was slightly happy. Obviously, Wendy did not fancy Gerald. Ads by Pub Future. Gerald smiled. Why are you smiling? Wendy seemed to be angry about Gerald's smile. She glared and said, How can someone like you have the courage to come out for a blind date? Well, since you don't like me, let us call it a day. Gerald didn't want to argue with Wendy, so he quickly said, At least you have some self-awareness. You are from the bottom of society. I feel a little embarrassed to sit with you at the same table. Wendy sneered, then stood up with her bag and said, You pay the bill. Gerald smiled bitterly but did not say anything. Wendy sneered, picked up her bag, and walked out. Gerald touched his nose and did not care. After Wendy left, he waved his hand and said, Waiter. The bill. At this time, a voice came from behind Gerald and said, Hey, I saw it all. Gerald was surprised. He turned around and found that Audrey was sitting at the table behind him. She was looking at him with a smile and a phone in her hand. Why did you follow me? Gerald asked speechlessly. I am curious. I want to see what a blind date is like. Audrey said with a chuckle, It was boring. That woman is very materialistic at first sight. She said that she lived a very fancy life and judged people by their appearance. If I were you, I would have thrown the new bank's diamond card on her face. Gerald smiled and said, Forget it, there's no need for that. I came here to make my mother happy. She doesn't like me, which is exactly what I want. If she really likes me, it will be troublesome. After paying, Gerald stood up and said, I'm going home. You should go back early too. They went outside and took a taxi to leave. At the same time, in another taxi, Wendy's face was extremely ugly. She felt that this blind date was a complete waste of her time. Wendy felt that Lilia had screwed her. Hello. Soon, on the other side of the line, Lilia picked up the phone and asked, Wendy, how is it? Have you seen Gerald? Ah, you're satisfied. Satisfied. Wendy said in a harsh tone, Lilia, do you think that I am that bad? Why did you introduce such a bad guy to me? Your nephew had been in prison for a few years. He has no house, no car, and no job. Are you insulting me? Do you think I am only worthy of this kind of person? Lilia was stunned and said, Gerald told you that. What the hell? Lilia, stop arranging blind dates for me. Wendy sneered. Lilia hurriedly said, Wendy, it's not like that. Gerald has been in prison for a few years, but he has a job now. He works in smiling face. Casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Universe Group. And as the assistant of Leandro, the single-armed entrepreneur of Universe Group. Moreover, he has a good Relationship with Mr. Hansen. He called Mr. Hansen before and found a job for Jolie. You said that Jolie's job was introduced by him. Wendy asked in surprise. Of course, Lilia said. Moreover, he has a good relationship with Jessica, who is your boss. I was thinking that if you two can get together, it will help your career. How can I introduce you to a common man? Although Gerald's father doesn't have much power, his annual salary is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wendy was stunned. Thinking of Gerald just now, and then thinking of her own attitude, Wendy was suddenly dumbfounded. Just now, Gerald also said that he knew Jessica. But Wendy did not believe it at all. She did not think that Gerald knew the boss of her company. In her opinion, Gerald was a pure loser, who was from the bottom of society. How could he get to know Jessica? But now it seemed that it was true. After a short moment of astonishment, Wendy quickly said, Lilia, you're not kidding, right? Why would I lie to you? You can ask others. Otherwise, how do you think Jolie can find a job with an annual salary of $160,000? Lilia said with a hint of flaunting. Wendy gritted her teeth. Thinking of her attitude just now, she couldn't help but feel conflicted. After a moment, she gritted her teeth and said, Lilia, can you ask him out again? I want to talk to him again. Great, Lilia hurriedly said. On the other side, Gerald did not know about all this. He took a taxi and returned to his community. When Gerald arrived at the entrance of the community, his eyes moved slightly and he looked in one direction. There were two tall beauties standing there. They were wearing tight skirts, revealing their long legs. One was wearing a black skirt. The other was wearing a white one. Their perfect bodies could make any man turn around. Most importantly, the two women looked exactly the same. They stood on the side of the road as if they were waiting for a taxi. At the same time, they were chatting with each other. Holy shit, twin beauties, Gerald said in surprise. Just as Gerald looked at the twins also looked at him, but their eyes quickly moved away. Before Gerald could appreciate them, a voice came beside him, Gerald. Gerald turned his head and found that next to him, the car door opened. Then, a person came out of the car with two gift boxes. It was Drake. It seemed that Drake did not sleep well. His dark circles were obvious. He carried the gift boxes to Gerald and said, Gerald, take this. I am so sorry, please be the bigger man and let me go. If this continues, I really can't stand it. The company I have worked hard for so many years is going to go bankrupt. Looking at Drake's pleading face, Gerald did not have the slightest sympathy because Drake was really disgusting. Drake pretended to pursue Jolie, but in the end, he only wanted to use her to build a relationship with Mason and reach an agreement with Universe Group. If he got an investment, he would dump Jolie. The key point was that he had a girlfriend. If not for the fact that his game project was really not good, he would have succeeded. Towards such a jerk, how could Gerald be soft-hearted? Gerald looked at Drake and revealed a smile on his face. Let you go. Why didn't you think of this day when you were doing all those disgusting things? Oh, by the way, never come to my place again. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. Drake gritted his teeth and looked at Gerald. I did something wrong before, but the benefits I gave Jolie and the others are real. Are you sure you want to do this? Gerald chuckled. He didn't want to pay attention to Drake. Gerald shook off Drake's arm and walked into the community with his hands crossed. Drake looked desperate and squatted on the ground, holding his head. Drake did not expect that Universe Group would really stand up for Gerald. He did not expect that the company he had spent several years building could face bankruptcy in such a short period of time. While they were talking, the twins not far away looked at them as if they were watching a show. When they looked at Gerald, there was a hint of coldness in their eyes, but more of a mockery. These two people were the two women beside Alonzo. They came here to investigate. This address was provided by Stephen. The two of them wanted to confirm and investigate. At the same time, if possible, they would chat with Gerald casually. Looking at Gerald's back, the beautiful woman in a black skirt showed a smile on her face. Then, she took out her mobile phone and dialed. Boss. Soon, the call was answered. Her voice was very pleasant. How is it? On the phone, a magnetic voice sounded. The beauty in the black skirt smiled and said, I saw him. He had an argument with someone, but he didn't show anything weird and didn't find us. Didn't Stephen say that he could beat more than 10 gangsters without getting hurt? This news was provided to the Kenneth family by Amo. The Kelsey family was on the verge of collapse, and they were trying to find a way to survive. Ads by Pub Future. Alonzo chuckled and said, this is nothing at all. Any blue card assassin in Blood Lotus can do it. He is probably born with great strength. Tomorrow, you can think of a way to meet him. Then, get his line and find a way to ask him out. It should be no problem for you two to ask a man out, right? The beauty in the black skirt said with a smile, no man can refuse us. Get this resolved as soon as possible. This is just something we did in passing. Our main purpose is still Jessica, Alonzo said calmly. The beauty in the black skirt muttered, then why are we waiting so long? I can ask him out for a drink now. Alonzo thought for a moment and nodded. All right. Gerald slowly walked towards the entrance of the community. Just as he was about to enter the community, a pleasant voice sounded from behind him, handsome. Gerald turned his head suspiciously and found that the twin sisters were standing not far behind him. Seeing them turn around, the beauty in the black skirt stepped forward and said, you're really handsome. Can you add me as a friend online? Gerald looked at them and asked in surprise, you want to add me online? The girl in the black skirt walked to Gerald's side. Her long legs were really attractive. A fragrance filled Gerald's nostrils. The beauty in the black skirt whispered, yes, we are looking for a handsome guy to go to the bar of course, we are willing to spend the night with you if you want. It only costs $1,600. As she spoke, a blush appeared on her face. Gerald was excited. Damn, were they prostitutes? The twin sisters only cost $1,600 a night. Moreover, they were so beautiful. No man could resist their temptation. They were even willing to get loans to spend a night with them. Gerald was a man. He could not resist such temptation. He coughed and said, it doesn't matter if we drink or not, I just want to spend some money. The beauty in the black skirt smiled and said, you're really impatient. At this time, the girl in the white skirt also came up. She held Gerald's arm and said, then let's go to the place we rented. It's safer. Gerald couldn't help but walk out then. The twin sisters stopped a taxi and pulled Gerald to sit in the back. They had Gerald sitting in the middle, each holding one of his arms. There was no doubt that now was the pinnacle of Gerald's life. The driver was so envious that he almost drooled. The two of them gave an address before the car slowly started. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. After getting in the car, the beauty in the black skirt asked, can you pay first? Gerald coughed and said, I'll give it to you after I am done. Humph. The beauty in the white skirt snorted and said, don't be so stingy. Gerald was not angry, his face was full of expectation, and he asked, well, what is your name? The beauty in the black skirt said, my name is Annie Carrillo. This is my sister, Hayden Carrillo. Good. Gerald smiled. Then he quietly looked at the driver and asked, you are so beautiful, so how can you become? Annie did not care about the driver at all. She smiled and said, I want to make more money. Anyway, we are not locals. When we return to our hometown, no one will know that we have done this. We can still find men to marry us. When the driver heard this, he seemed to be excited. He kept looking in the rear mirror, and the car was unstable. Gerald touched his nose and joked with the two women along the way. Occasionally, he would take advantage of them. It's so far, Gerald looked around and said. It's safer here, Annie said. It's dangerous in the city by the way, you have to pay the fare. All the guests we bring in will pay for this. Okay. Gerald took out his wallet. After getting out of the car, Gerald looked around. This place was sparsely populated, and the lights were dim. There should not be many people living nearby. Over there, Hayden pointed to an old-fashioned community with lights on in the distance. Let's go. Gerald looked impatient. The two women each held one of Gerald's arms, and Gerald also held their waists. Don't be so anxious. When we get home later, you can do whatever you want, Annie wiggled her waist and said. After walking along the road for a while, the surrounding lights became dimmer. Gerald saw from afar that not far away, a white car was parked there. They walked towards the car for a while. When Gerald was about 65 feet away from the car, he stopped and smiled at the car. You've been staring at us for so long. It's about time to get out of the car. Huh. The twin sisters were slightly stunned. Clap. At the same time, the car door opened, and a man in a windbreaker walked out. He was dressed in black and was clapping. Not bad. You actually found me. I underestimated you. He walked to the front of the car and took out a cigarette. He lit it and took a puff. He blew out a smoke ring and looked at Gerald. Gerald narrowed his eyes. Even though the lights were dim, he still saw the man's appearance just like what Gerald remembered. It was Alonzo, the fourth-ranked killer on the killer list. You're quite calm, Alonzo said lightly. Let go of those two women. Do as I say, and I can make your death quicker. Beside Gerald, the two women had smiles on their faces. They did not break free, but turned around and looked at Gerald with a smile. Gerald shrugged and used a bit of strength to hold them. He smiled and said, "What if I don't let?" Gerald said with a smile, "What if I don't let go? I have already negotiated the price with them, $1,600 a night. I have to make it count today. If you want them, line up and come back tomorrow." His words made Alonzo, who was not far away, slightly stunned. So were the two women next to Gerald. They were also stunned at first and then shook their heads with a smile. Alonzo held the cigarette in his hand, looked at Gerald, and said, "The ignorant are really fearless." As he spoke, Alonzo shook his head and said, "That's true. For an ordinary person like you, you feel that you are very powerful. To be able to fight a dozen gangsters by yourself." Unfortunately, Gerald was still standing there with a smile. "You still have time for a cigarette. Say your last words and choose a way to die," Alonzo said with a smile. Gerald frowned and said, "Die. Did someone ask you to kill me?" Alonzo looked at Gerald with disdain and said, "You finally knew it. But I don't think your life is worth $2.4 million. But since we agreed on the price, I should keep my promise. You only have a few minutes left to say your last words." The fourth on the underground killer list, the Windwalker, Alonzo, right? Gerald said. Gerald's words stunned the three people again. Alonzo's expression changed slightly. He picked up the cigarette and was slightly stunned. He looked at Gerald and said with a deep gaze, "Have you come into contact with people from the underground world? In prison?" Gerald did not answer him, but asked with a smile, "You don't have to worry about this. Now it is my turn to ask you. Who asked you to kill me? Give me a name. I can show some mercy when I kill you later." Huh. A cold light suddenly overflowed in Alonzo's eyes. Annie, one of the twin beauties, seemed to feel that something was wrong. She swallowed her saliva and said, "When did you find out? Who exactly are you?" Gerald smiled. His hand was still on her soft waist. He said with a smile, "It is true that no man can refuse such an invitation. But you have neglected one thing. You are so beautiful, and you are twins. If it is really for money, who knows how many rich people are willing to spend a lot of money on you. Why do you take the initiative to stand on the street and attract guests? Gerald smiled and said, and, when Alonzo goes out, there is always a pair of beautiful twins beside him, so it is not difficult to figure it out now. I am curious about who told you to come and kill. 1. Cone. Justin. Alonzo suddenly smiled and said, young man, you are very calm. Since you know that I am ranked 4th on the underground killer list, you still dare to talk nonsense here. You want to know who asked me to kill you, right? When you are about to die, I will tell you. After that, he flicked his finger. The cigarette in his hand flew straight at Gerald. He was 65 feet away from Gerald. But it was easy to feel the strength of his fingers. Gerald slightly raised his hands and slapped the two women's perky buttocks. He said, you two are not allowed to do anything. When I come back, I will pay. Got it? Ads by Pub Future. As he spoke, Gerald took a step forward. Like a cannonball, he arrived in front of Alonzo in an instant. He punched out at the same time. So fast. Alonzo hurriedly dodged to the side. Gerald's fist smashed into the car, causing the car to move sideways, and the place where it was hit directly caved in. Super! Alonzo exclaimed, and cold sweat instantly covered his forehead. He swiped his hand at his waist, and a cold dagger was about to be pulled out. Bang! Then Gerald arrived again. At the same time as Gerald pressed down on Alonzo's arms, Alonzo felt that his whole body had left the ground. Bang! Ah! Screams and the sound of falling to the ground rang out at the same time. Alonzo rolled on the ground and successfully pulled out the dagger. At the same time, he looked at the twin beauties not far away and said, hurry up and help. The two girls felt complicated. When Alonzo said the word, super, they were so scared that their faces turned pale. They were in Blood Lotus and knew very well what the word, super, meant. If I were you, I would not have chosen to fight. At this time, a sweet voice sounded not far away. Then, a figure wearing a red dress slowly walked over. Red Rose. Alonzo held the dagger and squatted on the ground. He said with an ugly expression, you know him. What exactly is going on? Hey, guy, since you know Red Rose, then we are friends. This is a misunderstanding. I can tell you who invited me to kill you. Gerald narrowed his eyes and looked at him. Oh, who is it? Stephen, from the Kenneth family in Sacramento. He asked me to kill you, Alonzo hurriedly said. Gerald was slightly surprised. Stephen wanted to kill him because of what happened 9 years ago. He did not want Gerald to reveal the truth 9 years ago. So it's him. Gerald touched his nose. Alonzo let out a breath and said, yes. Red Rose and I are both people of Blood Lotus. This is all a misunderstanding. We are all friends. Gerald narrowed his eyes. Friends. The people of Blood Lotus deserve to die. As he spoke, he walked towards Alonzo step by step. Alonzo's expression changed drastically. I have already told you the truth. When did I say that if you tell me, I will let you go? Gerald narrowed his eyes and said with a sneer. Red Rose laughed and covered her mouth. Alonzo, you probably don't know who he is. Cold sweat dripped down Alonzo's face onto the ground. He was ranked 4th on the underground killer list, but now, his heart was filled with fear. You. Who exactly are you? Alonzo looked at Gerald, his voice trembling. Him. He is Watchman number 0, who has disappeared for 3 years, Red Rose said with a smile. However, when these words came out, Alonzo could not help but take a step back again. He spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at Gerald in shock. Behind them, the beautiful eyes of the twin beauties also widened. This person was actually Watchman number 01. They couldn't believe it. When they took this job, they thought that he was just an ordinary person with a bit of brute force. But now, Red Rose told them that this person was the former Watchman No. 0. Not to mention $4 million, even if they were given far more than that, they would not dare to take this job. Alonzo's body began to tremble. He even gave up resisting. He looked at Red Rose and said, "You are actually working with Thay. Former watchman number 0. The leader will not forgive you if he knows." Red Rose said with a smile, "He doesn't dare to come out. Why should I be afraid of him? I'm voting for him to come out. Gerald really wants to kill him." Gerald shuddered when he heard this. Alonso's face was extremely ugly. He gritted his teeth and said, "How can you let me go?" "Let you go?" Gerald frowned. He thought of something and said, "It depends on my mood. Take me to see Afan now." Abazo was stunned, but he did not dare to hesitate. Gerald smiled and walked to the nervous tunes. He put each of his hands around their waists and said, "You two shall go with me." The bodies of the two women stiffened, but they did not dare to rest straight. Red Rose smiled at Gerald and said, "Then I'll not bother you." Gerald nodded and got into the car with the two women in his arms. Anno did not dare to resist. He obediently drove in front. Gerald and the two women sat in the Hano. After getting in the car, Gerald took out his phone and sent a line message to Dennis Grijang Baprise at the place where Eric was picked up yesterday. Yen he planned to give Allison to the night watch. Alonso had a higher stats than Red Rose, so half an hour later they restored in front of a detached whiz. Alonso was pale at this time. After the car stopped at the door, he took out his phone and said, "I will call him now and ask him to come down." After that, he made a call. When finished, Alonso got out of the car and stood there by the window. Soon, the door of the villa opened. Stephen, wearing a sleeping robe, came out of the villa. When he saw Alonso, he asked with a happy expression, "Done?" Alonso's face was dark. Stephen continued, "How is it? Did you kill him?" Noises came out. At this time, the window of the car in front of Stephen suddenly rolled down slowly. Gerald looked at him with a smile and asked, "You tell me?" When Stephen saw Gerald, Stephen's expression changed. "Pa." At the same time, Alonso slapped Stephen in the face and scolded, "Do you want to kill me?" Stephen was just an ordinary person, and Alonso's slap almost killed him. He spun in a circle and collapsed on the ground. Stephen opened his mouth and spat out 2 teeth and a mouthful of blood. He covered his face and looked ahead with shock. "You actually asked me to kill him. Do you know who he is?" "Fuck you." The more Alonso thought about it, the angrier he became. This whole thing started with Stephen. It was all because of Stephen that Alonso would be in danger now. Even Alonso still did not know what Gerald would do to him at all. At this time, Alonso only wanted to beat Stephen to death. And Stephen was still in shock and confusion. What the hell is going on? Didn't Alonso go to kill Gerald? How could Gerald show up here safe and sound? Why did Alonso come to beat me instead? And what did Alonso mean by saying that I wanted to get him killed? Stephen was so confused that he couldn't figure out what was going on. Alonso wanted to kick and beat Stephen, but Gerald waved his hand and said, "Don't beat him. Or you are going to kill him." Sure, Alonso hurriedly said. Stephen, who was sitting on the ground, covered his face, stunned. As someone who had contact with the underground world before, he knew who Alonso was. Alonso was the 4th killer ranked on the killer list in the criminal underworld. Why would he be so respectful to Gerald? "Drag him inside first," Gerald said calmly. Then Gerald got out of the car. Stephen was dragged into the villa by Alonso. Stephen lived alone in this huge villa. He was dragged to the living room, and Alonso threw him on the sofa. Gerald followed them to the sofa and sat down. Stephen nervously swallowed his saliva, gritted his teeth, and asked, Do you know each other?" But as soon as he finished speaking, Stephen shook his head to deny himself. If Alonso and Gerald knew each other, when Stephen showed Alonso Gerald's photo, Alonso wouldn't take this job. "Do you fucking know who he is? How dare you ask me to kill him? You are courting death." Alonso got angry again when he heard Stephen speak and ran over to slap him hard on his face. Stephen swallowed his saliva, and a trace of fear came to his mind. He knew what the people in the criminal underworld were like. These people wouldn't even blink their eyes when they killed people. Gerald looked at Stephen and asked indifferently, "Are you disappointed? Where have you been for the past 9 years? Stephen glared at Gerald in disbelief. He looked down on Gerald and felt that Gerald was not capable enough to go against him. Gerald had no money and no power. Stephen thought that it would be as easy as pie if he wanted to deal with Gerald. If it weren't for Holden, who had asked Stephen to make it quick and clean, he wouldn't have come to Alonzo. But now, Gerald was safe and sound, while Alonzo was so respectful to him. Even a moron could figure out that Gerald was completely different from who he used to be. "It's none of your business. Let's talk about what happened 9 years ago," Gerald said indifferently. Stephen looked hesitant. Suddenly, Alonzo pulled out his dagger and reached out to cover Stephen's mouth before he directly adds by pub future stabbed it into Stephen's leg without a word. Ouch! The intense pain made Stephen's eyes widen. He kept struggling, but his mouth was covered, and he could not make a sound at all. It took Stephen 1 or 2 minutes to come back to his senses from pain. It wasn't until then that Alonzo let go of him and said, "Tell us everything you know. Don't waste our time. This time I just stabbed your leg, but next time, I will make sure to cut off your head." Stephen couldn't feel the contempt he had when he first saw Gerald anymore. At this moment, his heart was filled with fear. He found that he could not see through Gerald at all. He shrank as he said, "I'll tell you everything you want to know." Gerald looked at him calmly. Stephen said, 9 years ago, we framed you. Mason was in the limelight at that time. His company developed too well, and it was in competition with the Zumthor family and the Kelsey family at that time. Mason and I were competing for the Feather Apparel. Feather Apparel was a large clothing company under the Kenneth family. Because of Mason's outstanding management, his company's performance far surpassed mine, Stephen said. Caspian saw Mason's potential. In order to keep Mason, he wanted to make Mason and you the direct line of descent from our family. Caspian also planned to give Mason 3% of the shares. Gerald's expression slightly changed when he heard this. He never expected that the Kenneth family would make such a decision 9 years ago. Of course, this was an internal decision, and it was not carried out in the end. Mason probably did not know it at all. But the 3% of the shares had to be handed out by Holden, who held the most shares at that time. Holden agreed, but he never planned to give it out at all. It happened that Mason was in competition with the other two big families for the two big projects. So Holden came to Mason's competitors and jointly them to design a scheme. Stephen gritted his teeth and said, "I was also competing with Mason at that time, and I would also benefit if he lost, so I participated in their plans. I wore makeup to pretend to be you and brought Bree into the hotel." Gerald frowned. Stephen's physical shape was indeed somewhat similar to Gerald's. There were indeed some top-notch makeup artists in the underworld that could be called masters. This was also something that Gerald could not figure out at the beginning. He was unconscious. Back then, how could the CCTV show that he brought Bree into the hotel? That was also the most direct evidence that put him in jail. Gerald said with a gloomy face, "Who drugged my wine?" "Cole." Stephen looked at Gerald and said through gritted teeth, "You sat next to him at that time. He exchanged your glass and drugged your wine." "What about Bree?" Gerald asked again. "After you fainted, we used your phone to call her out and drugged her too," Stephen said. "Because we all know the Kelsey family well. If they knew that their daughter had been roofied, they wouldn't spare you. So, the Kenneth family finally compromised and gave the Kelsey family a lot of benefits as compensation. But Holden hated them for that. Within the past 9 years, he joined many large companies to compete in the market with the Kelsey family. The Kelsey family has already lost what they had taken from us. They are collapsing now." Stephen looked at Gerald and said carefully, After you went to prison, your family was kicked out. Holden knew Mason's ability and was worried that Mason would target the Kenneth family after he staged a comeback. So when Mason went to work, Holden tried his best to suppress Mason. At that time, Caspian tacitly agreed with it and let it happen. When Mason got into the Universe group, Caspian went to talk to Leandro. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Personally, hoping that Leandro would fire Mason. But Leandro scolded him out, Stephen said. Honestly, hearing this, Gerald finally saw the whole picture. He remained silent, and his face darkened. He always thought that Stephen was the mastermind behind everything because Stephen was competing with Mason at that time. But now, after Stephen told him everything, Gerald finally understood that Holden was the real mastermind behind the scene. No wonder Holden did not dare to let him investigate. After Stephen finished speaking, he carefully looked at Gerald and said, Gerald, it has been 9 years. What are you going to? What I'm going to do is to destroy the Kenneth family. A cold and fierce look came into Gerald's eyes. When will the Kenneth family's year-end assessment get started? Next weekend, Stephen hurriedly said. I need you to go with me to the venue of the annual meeting next weekend and tell everyone the truth. If you refuse, you are dead, Gerald said lightly. Quote. Stephen frowned, restless and nervous. Don't you fucking hear? Alonzo growled, and a fierce look flashed across his face. I'll go, Stephen hurriedly said. Only then did Gerald stand up and say indifferently, drag him into the car. As he spoke, Gerald walked out the door. Alonzo did not dare to delay. He dragged Stephen to the passenger seat, then he cleared his throat dryly and said, Well, Gerald. I did everything you asked, right? Can I leave now? You can keep the car. Drive. Gerald glanced at Alonzo and said, or die. Sitting in the car, Stephen trembled. Alonzo was the 4th killer on the killer list. But he was actually so submissive in front of Gerald. And did not even dare to speak loudly. Gerald Kenneth. Who the hell are you? Stephen thought to himself. At the same time, he thought of Gerald saying that he wanted to destroy the Kenneth family, and Stephen felt his heart sink. Gerald and the twin beauties still sat in the backbeat. He was in a good mood. Now that he finally knew the truth, what he had to do was make the truth public. When they arrived, Gerald saw Dennis, Hamza, and the others. They stood there and waited. When they saw Gerald bring 4 people over, Dennis and the others looked surprised. But when they saw Alonzo, their expressions suddenly changed. Damn, you actually caught the son of a bitch. When Alonzo saw Dennis and the others, he felt weak all over. He knew that these people must be watchmen. I'm screwed. Alonzo couldn't help but think to himself. He wanted to escape but dared not to do so since Gerald was still here. Alonzo gritted his teeth. He could only wait and think of a way to get out of here when Gerald left. Hamza saw the twin beauties and was envious. He kicked Alonzo and said, Damn it. This son of a bitch knows how to enjoy life. He is. Dennis pointed at Stephen. Stephen's face was written fear instantly. He could guess that these people should be from the underworld, so he did not dare to move at all. He is the one who framed me 9 years ago. Take all of them to your place. Gerald waved his hand and said, Send him back to me next weekend. He pointed at Stephen and said. Dennis nodded, then he thought about something and said, Gerald, you should go back with us. Those 3 women are not willing to leave. Gerald frowned. He knew that Dennis was talking about Irene and the others. You haven't dealt with them yet? Gerald asked with a frown. We couldn't, Hamza scolded. Your mother-in-law throws a tantrum every day, and your ex-wife insists that she wants to remarry you. Otherwise, she wouldn't leave. There were several people standing by the river. Hamza and Dennis spread their hands. Dennis said, I think you have to go and talk to them. They don't listen to advice at all. If we let them out, they will tell others about the existence of the night watch. It will be quite troublesome. Gerald thought for a moment, then sneered, then let them stay in the night watch. They said so much, probably because they want money. You have so much money, can't you just give them several $1,000,000? Dennis was annoyed. If you don't want to, I can pay them. Gerald exhaled and said, how far is this place from your place? It takes 2 hours to drive, Dennis said. We just happen to be patrolling here. Gerald thought for a moment. It would take 2 hours to drive, which meant that it would take 4 hours to go back and forth. When he came back, it was already early in the morning. He actually lived with his parents. If he went back too late, they would probably worry about him. Gerald thought about it and said, then I will go to your base tomorrow, just send me the address. Online. Okay, Dennis said. Then he looked at Alonzo and the others. His face revealed a trace of a sinister smile. Alonzo felt a bad feeling in his heart. He swallowed his saliva and said, what are you going to? 1. Bang. As soon as he finished speaking, Hamza, who was standing next to him, hit him hard on the head. Alonzo's eyes darkened, and he fainted directly. This guy still has some tricks up his sleeve. In the case of accidents, knock him out first. The others should be easy to control. Dennis said. Then we'll meet again tomorrow. When we arrive, just call me. I'm afraid that those guys don't know you and will start a conflict with you. Okay. Gerald waved his hand. After watching Alonzo and the others leave, Gerald took a taxi and rushed home. At the same time, he took his phone and chatted with Caroline for a while. At around 9 o'clock in the evening, Gerald slowly arrived home. In the living room of the house, Mason and Yasmin were still watching TV. When they saw Gerald come back, their eyes widened. What happened to you? I asked you to go on a blind date. You ran to the girl and said that you no house, no car, and no job. Yasmin said in a serious tone, Gerald, you are not young anymore. And everyone thinks that you have been in prison for so many years. We are not qualified to choose your father, and I have done a lot for you. We want to have a grandson. Gerald had a headache. He coughed and said, that girl is indeed not suitable for me. When I just smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Arrived. She put on airs with me. Besides, she's very annoying. She looks down on me, and I look down on her, and I really have a girlfriend. You have only been back to Sacramento for a few days. Yasmin said. Where did you get your girlfriend? She is from Los Angeles. Didn't I tell you that I actually didn't stay in prison for the past 9 years? I stayed in Los Angeles for 3 years. I will bring her to see you another day, Gerald said. This time, Mason and his wife hesitated a little. Mason asked suspiciously, really? Yes, really. Gerald said, she will come to Sacramento in the next 2 days. When she comes, I may have to move out. Yes, although he really wanted to live with his parents, if he did that, there would be many things that were troublesome for him. The first thing was that it was a little troublesome to go out at night. As long as you can bring us a daughter-in-law, you can move to wherever you want, Mason said. Gerald's forehead was sweating. As expected, the parents were all similar. In order to make Audrey get married, Bradley tried to set her up with every single man he met. His parents were the same. After dealing with his parents, Gerald let out a slight sigh of relief. After washing up, he returned to his room and sat down cross-legged. The night passed silently. The next morning, Gerald got up and called Jacob. Since he wanted to bring Jacob to night watch, he would let Jacob get to know them in advance. He could also take this opportunity to let Jacob enter the night watch and give him some time to become stronger. When he and watchman number 2 went back, Jacob had grown a lot. It was best if he could keep up with Gerald and watchman no. 2. They had to go back to the night watch, and it was just a matter of time. After going back, they naturally had to build a new team. Their team was bound to be the elite team. There might not be many people, but they must be smart. Therefore, it was necessary for Jacob to go in as soon as possible to gain experience and grow. 1. Soon, the two met. Jacob drove over after receiving Gerald's $800,000. He first bought a bigger house for his family. And then bought himself a car. During this period of time, he was very glorious. First, he became the money-making champion in his family, and second, he bought a house and a car, making his relatives envious. And his previous girlfriend constantly wanted to get back together with him. Of course, he rejected it. He was really bitterly disappointed before. After Gerald got into his car, Jacob smiled and asked, "Are you taking me to see that mysterious organization?" "It's just a base," Gerald said. "Oh, if you want to join, I'm afraid you have to tell your family that you have been arranged to work outside the city by the company and then directly enter the night watch." "No problem," Jacob said. Gerald nodded and looked at Jacob. He frowned and said, "You still have to confirm it. I have to tell you that it will be very hard after joining the night watch at first, but there is no danger. When you carry out the mission later, you may face life-threatening danger at every moment. It doesn't matter anyway, my life is worthless. It is no different from death if I don't meet you." "Stop talking nonsense," Jacob said carelessly. Gerald nodded, then used his mobile navigation to input the address and said, "Here." 2 hours later, they stopped in a suburb. There were no buildings around. "Fuck, are you sure this is the place?" Jacob looked around the deserted area and asked speechlessly, "This is the Wilderness Inn." "The suburbs." Gerald looked around, pointed to the distance, and said, "Go that way." Jacob nodded. He drove along the dirt road for a while. 10 minutes later, the car turned a corner. Then, some beautiful buildings appeared in front of his eyes. The car slowly drove in. Soon, many people poked their heads out from the balcony of the house. Many people ran out of their own accord. "Why are there two people here? Which one is watchman number 0? While they were talking, several people rushed to Gerald and held him tightly. Gerald used to be on this team and was familiar with the veterans. "He is watchman number 0. He looks ordinary. I saw the current watchman number 0 last time. I feel that he is not as handsome as the current watchman. No." "Oh, 1. The voice of a female soldier entered Gerald's ears. "How can Trustin be called handsome? He is ugly." Gerald felt as if he had been insulted. After greeting them, Dennis finally dispersed them and said, "Come with me. By the way, drive. Manning and Macy will be here soon." "Why are they here all of a sudden?" Gerald asked in surprise. "I don't know the details. You can ask them when the time comes. Anyway, drive. Manning and those old men and women have been having a bad time recently," Dennis sighed and said. Gerald nodded and said, "Okay, take me to talk to Irene and the others first." Then he pushed Jacob and said, "This is also a new recruit. Take him to get to know a little bit about this place. I will ask him to come over next week and send him an errand there." Dennis said, "Okay." Soon, Gerald was brought to a house. At the door of the house, Vivian was washing a basket of vegetables. When she saw someone coming over, she looked up. When she saw Gerald, her face slightly lit up. Then she hurriedly said, "Mary, Irene, Gerald is here." Dak. Soon, Mary and Irene ran out of the door. When they saw Gerald, they looked embarrassed. During this period of time, they had heard too much about Gerald and understood the existence of the night watch. The more they heard, the more they regretted what they had done to Gerald. "Let us go in and talk." Gerald looked at them and frowned. Dennis pursed his lips and said, "You can talk about it yourself. I won't be with you." Gerald looked at him speechlessly. Originally, he wanted the internal members of the night watch to persuade them, but he never expected that Dennis couldn't handle it. He sighed and had no choice but to walk into the room. The house that Dennis gave them was quite good. It felt like a solitary house, and the interior decoration was also quite good. Seeing Gerald walk in, Mary hurriedly smiled and said, "Come here, Vivian," quickly poured Gerald a cup of water. Gerald couldn't get used to their kindness. When Mary saw Gerald in the past, she always rolled her eyes. Most of the time, she had been beating him, scolding him, and disdaining him. Even after Gerald had glory world, Mary at that time hadn't changed much. She still looked down on Gerald. But this time, it was completely different. Mary treated Gerald like she treated Adriel back then, or even better. This made Gerald, who had been scolded by her for 3 years, a little unable to adapt for a moment. Gerald frowned and sat down. Vivian brought him a cup of water and sat next to Irene. Irene still had long hair and was indeed very beautiful. Sitting there, she was a great view. But this was nothing to Gerald. Gerald frowned and asked, "Why don't you want to go back?" Irene was stunned at this time. Mary hurriedly said, "Gerald, we are waiting for you. We want to have a good chat with you. It was indeed our fault in the past. Irene also understood that you were good to her. She used to go the wrong way, but I hope you can forgive her this time. You can get married again. I think her father underground also wants you two to be happy together. When you first came to our house, he treated you very well." Mary said. Gerald did not expect them to bring out Shelton. Gerald frowned and said, "It is impossible to get married again. Last time I saved you, I also completely repaid your favor. This time, I just hope that you can go back." Mary gritted her teeth and said, "All right, Gerald, it's fine if you don't want to get married again. As long as you give us glory world, we will leave. We will definitely not mention a word about night watch." Gerald smiled. As he had expected, this family was unwilling to leave because of money. "Why?" Gerald looked at her and asked. Smiling face. "Casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Let me tell you this again. For the past 3 years, if your mother and daughter or your family had treated me better, it would not have been like this," Gerald said. "If not for the fact that you guys are still here and causing trouble for others, I would never have come back." Irene gritted her teeth and looked at Gerald. "Gerald, no matter what, we have been husband and wife for 3 years. My mother and I have nothing now. Do you really have to be so cruel to us? What you guys are doing has nothing to do with me. I just came today to inform you," Gerald said. "Please, I have given you enough. I have raised you for 3 years and left you a house. This time, I saved your lives. It is enough." Seeing that Gerald was really unwilling to give a single cent, Mary said, "Gerald, if you don't give us some compensation, we will never leave. If you let us leave, we will spread the news about the night watch everywhere." Gerald laughed. He looked at the mother and daughter with a fake smile and said, "Why do you you are still here? Why are you still living here? That is because you used to have a relationship with me. They respected me. Do you think they are really worried that you will expose the night watch?" Gerald cheered and said, "If you expose it, will anyone believe it?" Mary and the other two were instantly stunned. "Don't be so shameless. Your trick is useless." Gerald waved his hand and said, "Show some respect to each other. We are not from the same world. It's good for us to cut off our relationship as soon as possible. In addition, I will clearly tell you that there are many people in this world who want to kill me. Do you know the person who kidnapped you last time? If you remarry me, I won't be able to save you next time." Gerald had a hint of coldness on his face. Thinking of the person from the last time, the 3 women couldn't help but change their expressions. That's all. Gerald did not want to talk nonsense with them anymore. After he finished speaking, he stood up. When Irene saw that Gerald was about to leave, her eyes turned red, and tears flowed down. She said, "Gerald, I really know that I was wrong. Please forgive me this time." Gerald waved his hand and said indifferently, "Pack up and go back to Los Angeles. Go to Forever Group to find Bradley and ask him to arrange a job for you. Then find someone new and marry him. In the future, treat your husband better. Gerald finally softened his heart and planned to introduce a job to Irene. Of course, he also knew what Mary was like. If he really did not give any benefits, she would definitely stay here. If they really stayed or went back to publicize the night watch, it would more or less cause some trouble for them. Irene cried. She really regretted it. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. In the past 3 years, Gerald had treated them well. Perhaps he did not earn much, but she did not need to worry about money. Moreover, they now knew Gerald's true identity. Irene, it's all my fault, I'm sorry. Mary took Irene in her arms and said. Gerald ignored her. He walked out of the room and breathed a sigh of relief. He had only taken a few steps when he found at the corner that several people were sticking their ears to the wall. It was Dennis and the others. Gerald asked speechlessly, "What are you guys doing?" Dennis and the others quickly stood up. He rubbed his nose and said, "Nothing, I'm just hanging out here." "Fuck," Gerald said. "What should we do next?" Dennis asked. "I've said everything I need to say. You guys continue with your work and then send them away if they still want to continue staying here. Just let them stay here. I can't be bothered." Gerald shrugged his shoulders and said. Dennis nodded. "You've come to this, and you've also given them some benefits. There should be no problem. Come on, let's go. Drink a little." "I don't want to drink anymore." Gerald shook his head and said, "We will go back to Sacramento after eating some food. We still have to drive. By the way, when will drive Manning arrive?" "It will probably be late at night," Dennis said. Gerald touched his nose and said, "Then I won't wait for her. Let's have some food and leave." "Sure," Dennis said. "By the way, let me ask you something. Where is this Eric guy from? He is ranked 5th on the underground killer list. Yesterday, he came to our place and then sparred with our people. I found that his fighting skills are a bit like No. 2 inches. Gerald nodded and said, "He is the disciple of No. 2. I have already met with number 2, but she is not willing to come back now." Dennis paused for a moment and looked at Hamzal. Gerald frowned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Dennis said. "I just didn't expect number 2 to be unwilling to come back." Gerald didn't think too much about it. He hooked his arm around Dennis' neck and said, "Let us go. Eat first." Dennis nodded. At the same time, he heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, when he heard that Caroline and Gerald had already met, he was slightly shocked. However, seeing Gerald's reaction, he guessed that Caroline did not tell Gerald about it. Otherwise, Gerald should have gone to Europe with a knife now. After dinner, Gerald left with Jacob. When he left, Jacob was very excited. He had seen many watchmen sparring and training. They were like martial arts masters. Thinking that he would become such a person in the future, he was excited. After getting in the car, he was still talking to Gerald, and Gerald was patiently explaining to him. About an hour and a half after leaving the night watch base, Gerald's phone suddenly rang. It was from Kiera. "Hello, Gerald? Come and find me." Kiera's voice came out. "Reese is at my house."